Cassie had said something about D-Rock being head of Puff Security after I had left.
So it meant a lot to me to actually have the opportunity to work with somebody of that magnitude.
What is the job of an executive assistant? What do you do?
Well, the job of an executive assistant is to staff him. 24/7, essentially, he needs staffing.
Puff may have promised D-Rock something to help him get big to that party.
Would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
What happens when one of the biggest music singers is faced with unexpected courtroom revelations? In today's video, we'll explore the disturbing allegations of freak-off nights, the absurd request that shook the courtroom, and Diddy's former assistant's explosive evidence. In real time, how did Diddy react? Remain to discover the full story as it unfolded day by day.
With us at all times. We'd have their marijuana joints on us. We would have the mushrooms on us. We had a kind of a Diddy pack is what they would call it. And we would keep a satchel on us, and that's what we would have in that satchel. They were referred to me as Wild King Nights. And what a Wild King Night was when him and a guest would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings. I would have to go and prep that hotel room, which consisted of baby oil, Astroglide, candles, incense, liquor, lights, tons of toiletries, drugs. I had no idea that he had this other side to him. And when I started to get exposed to his lifestyle, I started to really realize, this guy has an addiction. It's not just, once every few weeks, it's every day, every hour.
Hey, yo, Phil, can y'all come straighten it up over here? I'm not looking luxurious.
The personal assistant also became the personal maid. Diddy's sex parties meant hotel rooms were often trashed. Phil was expected to get his hands dirty cleaning up, with the priority being to ensure no evidence was left behind. No secrets could ever escape.
Initially, when you walk in, you have to start to clean up the mess and the records that's left from the room. And that's the alcohol that's halfway open. Some bottles are cracked, glasses are cracked. There's baby oil everywhere on the floors in the bathroom. There's lube everywhere, half open, some of it oozing off the sides. And you have to get all that stuff, clean it up. Luckily, I would wear even a mask and I would wear gloves because it was disgusting.
Phil, what would have happened if you said to Diddy, look, that's just not my job, I'm not going to do it?
If I said that to Diddy, I wouldn't have worked there. They would find somebody else.
With a firm, clear voice, the former assistant immediately grabbed attention as Diddy sat at the defense table, avoiding direct eye contact. They weren't merely workers. They were insiders who were familiar with Diddy's routines, including both personal and professional indulgences. Their meticulous description of their role strengthened their credibility as more than a mere observer of the events in question. When it came time for Diddy's former assistant to testify, the courtroom became silent. The assistant painted a picture that astounded everyone in earshot, describing the lavish and covert nature of these activities in a steady tone. These were nights of intense secrecy, attended by a small number of insiders, and it wasn't just about extravagant parties. According to the testimony, control was crucial during these events. The so-called these-offs were elaborate presentations that Diddy himself had meticulously chosen. From the guest list to the atmosphere, every element of the event was well planned, and invitations were not distributed haphazardly. The assistant then revealed terrifying demands that were made to satisfy Diddy's expectations on these evenings. According to their own words, the process, which they regarded as degrading, involved making uncomfortable and very detailed arrangements for these occasions. This was not your typical party. It was excess at its most strategic. The gallery sent out audible gasps when they revealed this, and even the lawyers exchanged quick, nervous looks. With every statement, the room's atmosphere shifted and became heavier. The judge took notes from several of the jury members at certain points, but otherwise seemed uninterested. According to the assistant, their role was to make sure that guests followed unwritten guidelines intended to maintain confidentiality and warn them of the serious repercussions of transgressing them. Members were clearly uncomfortable. The assistant didn't hold back when it came time to get specific. They discussed an alleged instance in which they had to arbitrate a dispute between Diddy and an obstinate guest, claiming that he would do whatever it took to maintain control over the entire evening. Diddy shifted in his seat, rubbed his eyes, straightened his tie, and sighed loudly at the mention of this specific incident. It was among his first outward manifestations of emotion throughout this phase of the trial. Diddy's manner continued to convey the gravity of what had happened, even as the assistant continued to provide more stories. Revealed, but the courtroom remained focused on the picture of one specific episode, exposing a shocking secret that few could have foreseen. Yet there were still other voices that were to be heard. This was not the only one.
See, I know two situations like that. See, Cassie told the story on the witness stand about how Puff and her was in a freak off, and then D-Rock intervened or whatever like that, and they masked themselves up in all black, took the guns out the safe, and went to find Suge. You know what I'm saying? Suge even spoke about he glad they didn't find him because a whole lot of other people would probably been dead then too, you know, if they would have found him. Now, she testified that, you know, Puff and D-Rock was going to try to, you know, unalive Suge. You know what I'm saying? Now, what I do know this, me and D-Rock had a conversation about why he's so close to Puff now. You understand? And he told me he was in a diner, Mel's Diner. I guess it was probably Mel's Diner. That's one of the diners that stay late open in California. He said that he was trapped in there and he ain't have no burners or nothing on him. He ain't have no guns, no nothing. He said he called Puff. Now, this is a story coming from D-Rock. He said he called Puff and Puff came there. But if Puff would have came in the diner, they would have known something. He didn't come to the diner. He sent Cassie in there with the burners. And Cassie gave D-Rock the gun in the diner. Now, this is coming from D-Rock. The story Cassie told is that it was a whole different story from what D-Rock had told me, because D-Rock said he was in the diner himself. And Puff came down there with the guns, sent Cassie in there and gave him one, and was outside waiting on him to come outside. So that's the story that I knew, and I had already said that and expressed that in one of my shows before. Now, the story Cassie told, it was like she saw D-Rock and Puff both put on black and went to go unalive Suge. So those are two different stories that I know of. You know, one from D-Rock and the one we heard from Cassie. It may be the same story and Cassie just flipped it some kind of way, because D-Rock told me this years ago. And then maybe Cassie just, you know, flipped it in a certain kind of way because she took the gun to D-Rock, according to D-Rock.
Diddy sat erect, his hands clasped in front of him, his jaw clearly clenched, for the first 30 minutes of the former assistant's evidence. He didn't flinch. Instead, a controlled tightness seemed to replace his customary air of assurance. Anyone who looked closely could see the cracks starting to appear in his face, which was carved into an expressionless mask with his eyes fixated downward. As the assistant's comments provided a detailed description of the so-called freak-off evenings, his small motions, such as tilting his tie slightly forward and then back, suggested the storm that was building beneath the surface. Rumors began to spread around the gallery, and the descriptions directly addressed the concerning demands that Diddy was purportedly making. The assistant explained evenings when maintaining confidentiality was essential, and in addition to being advised, stringently enforced guest conduct control. One especially distressing instance of a guest being removed for breaking an unspoken rule was recounted by the assistant. Diddy glanced toward his defense unit, and his expression shifted from irritation to incredulity for a moment. The momentum of the evidence was also felt in the gallery, where background muttering was audible. As the evidence became more detailed, some legal analysts later compared the mood in the room to a gradual unfolding of a boiling pot that was about to overflow, while others said it felt intense enough to cut with a knife. Outside the courthouse, reporters were riveted to their phones, giving real-time updates, while others were leaning toward one another and sharing short, wide-eyed stares. One witness in the room noticed Diddy inhaling deeply, clasping his hands, and becoming more obviously annoyed as his mask began to come off, and the assistant gave particular reports of behavior they were to ignore or enable. Observers in the courtroom said Diddy's calm finally gave out when he leaned over to his lawyer and said something cutting, though the words were not clear to those in the gallery, and his tone was one of evident irritation. Someone in the audience gasped when Diddy himself coerced a visitor into complying, making this one of the more disturbing aspects that came to light. He sat back abruptly after a few moments, shook his head, and muttered something. The man's remark was uncommon and unfiltered, and the gesture was subtle but noteworthy. The legal experts watching the hearing were clearly becoming irritated, with the testimony after they had maintained composure for hours. The courtroom is an equalizer, and public figures, especially those used to controlling their image, may find it difficult to face deeply personal or catastrophic allegations in front of a highly scrutinized public audience. It was not unusual for this kind of external response. The mystique and glitz of celebrity don't matter when your character is being pulled apart word by word, a researcher once stated of Diddy's. At the end of the day's session, it was clear that Diddy had been deeply impacted by the assistant's disclosures, which had touched on parts of his personal life that had long been concealed behind a meticulously crafted public image. He hurried by the throng faster than normal and avoided eye contact with reporters as he left the courthouse, but his inner emotions had already given the assistant's charges more credence and provided some indication of how serious the issue was.
For some reason, Big had to be at that party because Puff is the one who, and you'll see in Kirk Burroughs' papers, that Puff is the one who scratched out Big trip from going to London, and then turned around and lied that Big didn't want to go to London, which was a bunch of crap. You understand what I'm saying? Because he asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. He asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. And Clark Kent was going to go to London with him, God bless the dead. You understand? Clark Kent told that story. Now, in this trial, Cassie was telling how D-Rock and Puff was trying to line Suge Knight up. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to get into the fact that D-Rock has been with Puff since Big died. You understand? He went and did a little time, and when he was in jail, he was letting everybody know when he come home, Puff was going to take care of him. And he became head of Puff security, making sure Puff was all right. Puff also gave him that clothing line, which was Bully. It was Big's ideal, but it was Invisible Bully. You understand? Gave him that clothing line. They was doing a little work, and he was doing the t-shirts and everything like that. And I guess Puff was actually, paying him back for helping him get Big to that party. I'm glad Ms. Wallace ain't here, brother, to see and hear what we're finding out about D-Rock now and the things that he did and how he was, so close to Puff and doing some of the things with Puff. And it's crazy right now. I'm glad Ms. Wallace is not here to hear that because she was somewhat fond of D-Rock.
When Gandil, Diddy's longtime confidant and former bodyguard, was brought to testify, the courtroom was still in disbelief over the assistant's revelations. The fact that Gandil was present at the height of Diddy's power and could attest to the kind of access that only a reliable insider would have meant that his presence immediately gave the proceedings additional weight. Even though he had broken up with Diddy years prior, his testimony was anticipated to either confirm the concerning image presented by the everybody in the courtroom knew the stakes, whether they helped or ruined it. Gene's actions were very different from previous testimonies. His calm and considered response gave the impression that he was determined to express his opinions. His opening statement, "I saw things firsthand," set the tone for a sharp and unyielding account while reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Gann recalled the infamous night in details that matched and often surpassed the assistant's earlier claims. Gene elaborated on the conditions of these gatherings. Meticulously planned, calling them controlled chaos, he asserted that participants were forced to conform under the guise of exclusivity, and that these gatherings were not just for enjoyment, but were intended to maintain power dynamics. Rather than merely agreeing with previous charges, what was most notable about Gann's testimony was the accuracy of his stories. One incident that stood out was when Gene described an occasion when he claimed Diddy gave staff members explicit instructions to enforce strict participation guidelines. He hoped everything would proceed according to plan. As he explained the pressure techniques used to isolate and intimidate people at the parties, Gene added, "Anyone not playing along wasn't just asked to leave. They were humiliated," which caused the gallery to sit stunned. As Gene added to the drama, Doty remained composed at the defense table, clenching his jaw but otherwise keeping his shoulders taut and tapping his foot sporadically. Additionally, Gene asserted that confidentiality was not only encouraged, but specifically required, demonstrated that employees were sworn to keep quiet about what took place behind closed doors, and that phones were confiscated at the door. To shield Diddy from public scrutiny, his remarks portrayed extremely guarded situations. This was emphasized by the prosecution, who presented the concealment as evidence that Diddy was aware of the possible harm these alleged acts may bring if they were ever made public. His decision to speak was as much about clearing his conscience as it was about hitting Diddy. "For years, I stayed quiet out of loyalty, but it has gone too far," Gene continued. The defense found it difficult to deny the story in front of the jury, and by the end of Gene's testimony, it was clear that his claims confirmed a significant chunk of the assistant's account, even though his motives were likely complex. Gene, Deal had achieved more than simply verifying allegations, even though his revelations were arguably the most compelling. He had created a story about Diddy's private life that, if believed, might change everything.
That's an effed up subject and situation, man, to even imagine that you got somebody doing that to somebody that you supposed to care about and you supposed to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, when I heard that, that was crazy to hear. Disturbing, man.
You can't make this shit up, bro. This is made for Triple X TV. The stories that we're hearing about the things that Cassie has done, and we got these people out here believing that, she made this shit up. She ain't did this with nobody. I ain't seen not one of her ex-boyfriends. I ain't seen not one of the people that she dated in high school or none of that stuff come out and say that she was doing that way before she got to Diddy. So it is disturbing, bro. It's disturbing that he could brainwash her to the point whereas that she believing that she pleasing him and all his fetishes and everything by doing some shit that she's doing for him, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, she testified that Diddy, he'll rub male escorts cum on his nipples.
Bro, what do you want me to say about that? That's some nasty, perverted shit. You know what I'm saying? Bro, when you that high and you into that, to me, that's the demonic, bro. That's some old crazy otherworld shit. Excuse me for my language. That's some crazy otherworld stuff that people in their right minds don't even think of stuff like that, bro. People that's not in a whole sense of being perverted, that's Triple X type of shit, man. That's stuff that normal people don't even think of, man. How high do you get that you want another man juices rubbed on you after dating ejaculated or come on your girl? How high do you get for that shit, bro? I always say this. Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
There was intense focus in the courtroom as additional information regarding the infamous freak-off evenings emerged. The statements made by the assistant had already created a web of control, luxury, and secrecy, and now they were being directly questioned. Their answers were startling. According to the assistant's evidence, these parties were anything but spontaneous gatherings. Rather, they were meticulously planned affairs, with nearly every aspect planned to meet Diddy's preferences. These evenings, a carefully curated guest list, distributed only to a chosen few who were sworn to discretion, often kicked off the evenings. Participants included both industry insiders and lesser-known individuals, and they were all allegedly expected to abide by stringent and often awkward regulations. To prevent any recordings or pictures from ever coming to light, mobile devices were gathered at the entrance and were absolutely forbidden. Was more than simply hosting. It was about creating an environment where nothing happened without his permission. The moment of shock became more complex as the assistant recounted specific parties' occurrences, including allegations of unruly behavior toward visitors. They described a night when a guest allegedly refused to comply with one of Diddy's demands. According to the assistant, the visitor was quickly taken out, made to look foolish in front of the others, and led away. They made the assertion, there was no room for defiance, which echoed throughout the courtroom. Many people were left in shock by that discovery. There were whispers in the crowd, and even the jury moved in their seats, clearly uneasy at the descriptions. The accusations didn't stop there. In addition, the assistant described how Diddy allegedly kept things under wraps by encouraging loyalty among his inner circle and suppressing anyone who dared to speak up, saying that, if you didn't play by the rules, you were out, no questions asked. Their evidence suggested that the atmosphere of the parties was designed to confuse coercion and participation, painting a picture of manipulation, and they asserted that this level of control was deliberate and not accidental while recounting another story. Observers outside the courtroom commented on the seriousness of these accusations, drawing comparisons to high-profile incidents involving other celebrities. While Diddy remained motionless, his expression dark and inscrutable despite the obvious stress surrounding him. As the courtroom processed these revelations, the assistant explained how alcohol and mood-enhancing drugs were regularly available, creating a heady atmosphere that increased the pressure on attendees to fit in, as they stressed that anyone who seemed uncomfortable was either told to leave quietly or made to feel that their hesitation was a failure to fit in. Even though the most shocking incident of all still needed to be addressed, the assistant's words had left an impression that was hard to shake. These specific incidents could prove crucial not only for the trial itself, but also for the public's perception of Diddy's actions behind the scenes. By the end of the day, many audience members couldn't help but wonder about the far-reaching implications of the events described.
But is that what he's doing? Is he running an entertainment and fashion industry, or is he running essentially a criminal organization?
By the way, we have a poll up right now. You can participate in it. Do you think Cassie Ventura was a victim or partner in this? Ready for this? 82%. Well, this doesn't make sense. 82% say yes. I don't know if that's yes to, I think we need clarification. 82% say victim or partner. We'll get a clarification on that.
By the way,
right now.
But that's my answer to that question.
Oh, okay. 82% say victim. 82% say victim. Maybe based on we're reporting on the testimony right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think she is a victim if the allegations are true, but also she is involved in some of the criminal I mean, she's getting those prostitutes, right? She's making payments to them, allegedly. She's having them come. So she's involved in some of the alleged criminal activity. And that's an interesting point that wouldn't just apply to her. Other people in his orbit might be some combination of victim and co-conspirator.
But you know what? That video changes everything, because the argument would be, what do you think happens if she says no?
Yeah.
What do you think happens if she says, I'm not in the mood for a freak off tonight. I'm not going to pay the dancer.
I'll be sure he came out saying that Kim Porter death needs to be looked into.
I think that Al being his ex-wife, he have every right knowing about the stuff that came out about Diddy and what he was doing. You understand what he has done in the past, and people have overlooked it. By him coming out and saying that he hoped that he could get her case reopened. There was a guy called John the Paperwork Party. They would put in an open petition to get Kim's case reopen. You understand what I'm saying? So I'll Be Sure doing this is showing that, you know, he still got love for Quincy's mother. He still want to find out the truth because allegedly Kim was fine the day before and the day of her death. And then now she found in the bed dead from pneumonia. That just don't sound right, bro. That don't sound right at all.
So you feel the same way about her death being suspect?
I don't think nobody in America thinks nothing suspicious about Kim's death, bro. If you are rich like that, you could, you know, Kim had, I think a net worth of like, what, 12 million a year or something like that? Kim could have called any doctor to come over and look at her. If she was that bad, you know, she could have called an ambulance or something like that. Everything is suspicious about her death, bro. And I don't think an autopsy was done on her. And if it was a half job.
You personally, right? What do you think happened to Kim Porter?
If I say something personal, bro, and my belief, and I put it on to the public, then I might be like.
For many years, Diddy's career has been defined by power, influence, and a cultural legacy. From his dominance in the music industry to his ventures into the fashion and media industries, he represented more than just a celebrity. His brand thrived on the image of success, luxury, and creativity, making him a name synonymous with both talent and ambition. However, the courtroom revelations surrounding the allegations have started to erode that polished persona, leaving many wondering what this trial means for his once unshakable legacy. The trial's hashtags trended for days, evoking everything from disbelief to anger, and for many, it wasn't just a simple legal battle. It felt like the potential unraveling of a man whose influence once seemed untouchable. Gene Deal's supporting testimony added yet another layer of impact for those who had closely followed Diddy's career. Media headlines exploded with phrases like Diddy's dark side and allegations that might end a legacy, telling those who witnessed the public reaction that the testimony had had a profound impact on his reputation. According to a legal observer, when multiple people step forward to provide consistent details, the court and public opinion cannot ignore it. The public, already grappling with the assistant's shocking accusations, now had a second voice endorsing much of the same story. The larger implications of these accusations are hard to ignore, as this sentiment extended well beyond the courtroom, raising doubts about Diddy's legal status and industry ties. Scandals, especially those that touch on the core of their painstakingly cultivated reputations, have been known to negatively affect even the most powerful public figures. Legal experts watching the trial have also shared their thoughts, with some arguing that the accusations alone have already caused a serious setback to Diddy's reputation, regardless of the trial's verdict. Diddy's case is still unique, but the trial has already started to mirror trends seen in those earlier cases, with media discussions surrounding power entitlement and the duties of those in positions of authority resurfacing, with some wondering if these accusations would permanently change how Diddy's contributions to music and culture are viewed. High-profile cases like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein show how easily legacies can be destroyed once accusations exceed a certain threshold. With so many questions still unanswered in the ongoing trial, the stakes for Diddy's legacy could not be higher. It is unclear whether his empire can withstand the storm, but one thing is certain: the impact of these revelations will extend well beyond the courtroom walls. The only thing left to do is speculate as to how much more harm the remaining testimony might do. One expert stated, "The court of public opinion is extremely powerful, even in the absence of a verdict." Others pointed out that for individuals like Diddy, whose reputation is closely linked to their business endeavors, the implications of this public scrutiny could reach far beyond the verdict, affecting partnerships, future projects, and influence in the entertainment industry. The disturbing revelations Diddy made could change his career and reputation. Each report uncovered a new layer of allegations of control and manipulation at the core of these notoriously wild nights. What's surprising is that these revelations gave the entertainment industry and the unchecked power that goes on behind closed doors a more critical light. This case raises the question of whether these institutions are set up to protect powerful people at any cost, as the shockwaves already seem to be able to reach beyond a single guy. Stay tuned for updates.